Good evening, everyone. Let's go ahead and find our seats. Glad to have you tonight, and we're going to start with number 516. 516. I love to tell the story of unseen things above, of Jesus and His glory, of Jesus and His love. I love to tell the story because I know 'tis true. It satisfies my longings as nothing else can do. I love to tell the story. 'Twill be my theme in glory to tell the old story of Jesus and His love. I love to tell the story. 'Tis pleasant to repeat what seems each time I tell it so wonderfully sweet. I love to tell the story, for some have never heard the message of salvation from God's own holy word. I love to tell the story. 'Twill be my theme in glory to tell the old story of Jesus and His love. I love to tell the story for those who know it best, seem hungering and thirsting to hear it like a rest. And when in scenes of glory I sing the new song, 'twill be the old story that I have loved so long. I love to tell the story. 'Twill be my theme in glory to tell the old story of Jesus and His love. And you may have come expecting Dr. Jeff, but he bailed out on us. He had a heart cath today, and fortunately, he doesn't have to have a stent. But I guess if you don't want to speak, that's what you need to do. Come on today. No, I'm just kidding you. We pray for Dr. Jeff, and we'll have several prayer requests when we get to that part of the evening. But Bert has agreed to jump in and fill in, and he's going to share something of his personal testimony tonight. So, Ernest, yes, Sue?
Can I make just a quick announcement?
Okay.
We're passing a card around for Miss Beth for everyone to sign.
Dentists around here. It's kind of interesting. I guess it was just meant to be. I had recently told the other elders that, we started some time ago, years ago, having some testimonies all along, and I really like that a lot. I really, for a lot of reasons, am glad that we've made that a practice. And I had just told the other elders that, I haven't done this in a long time here. I would like to do it sometime, and I'll do it whenever someone has to cancel, and we're on short notice on a Wednesday night. And right after that, Jeff contacted me. He had his heart procedure today. I said, well, that's just an omen. The Lord's telling me that this is the time. But like I said, I really am glad we make it a practice to do this. Bible tells us in 1 Timothy 1:8 that we should not be ashamed of the testimony of our Lord, and that's what I want to start out saying. Is that this is? I asked him if we would sing. I love to tell the story because this is the Lord's story. It's not. It is my story, but it's really the story of how the Lord has been working on me and in me, and hopefully through me a bit through my life. Lessons that He's taught me along the way. 1 Peter 3:15 tells us to be ready to give an account for why we have hope. And, I think it's very appropriate on a day where we are celebrating the homegoing of a beloved saint here that we know he's with the Lord. And, why do we have hope? Why do we have hope that that's where we can be one day as well? And we ought to be able to share our story. One great thing about a testimony is that, other people can't really argue. They can argue about your theology, or they can argue about different things, but they can't really argue about your story. I mean, this is what the Lord has done in my life. And so, everybody's testimony is a bit different depending on at what stage in life they were saved, their background. I'm really going to focus on just some of the things that the Lord has at least been trying to teach me through the years, or hopefully I've been learning a little bit of. And I can just see the sovereign hand of God at work throughout my life. I think for many of us, the older we get, we kind of look back and we can just see how God was at work even when we didn't realize just exactly how or what was going on there. So I'm going to share you some things. It's not going to all be chronological. I may pivot a little bit. But again, we all have our own testimonies. But I will start kind of at my beginning. The first birth I was born and raised right here in Reidsville. My parents were God-fearing believers. They taught me about God from the beginning, which I do believe is the very most important thing we can do as parents. None of us are perfect parents, and mine certainly weren't, but they did teach me about God, and they took me to church, and so as far as I'm concerned, they checked the most important box. But my second birth was when I was 8 years old, and it was actually on July the 26th, 1970, and the only reason I even know that date is that I still have a little Gospel of John that I was given on that date. It was right up town here. Some of you remember Kiker Stadium, the old Kiker Stadium in Reidsville. I publicly received Christ as my Lord and Savior at a gospel crusade there in Kiker Stadium. It was led by Grady Wilson. He was on the Billy Graham evangelistic team. He was one of the ones that would go out to the smaller towns like Reidsville when Billy Graham was going to the big cities. But obviously the Lord had been working in my life, and the Lord had, I had been learning things as I went. As I said, my parents had taught me about the Lord, and I think it was just at that point in my life where my heart had been prepared to receive the gospel. I think that should be an encouragement to all of us as parents or mentors to young people or to anybody, that sometimes we don't see how it's working in somebody's heart, but it is. And then the time comes when that heart is just prepared to receive the gospel. And I guess by the time I was 8 years old, it was clearly presented well enough, and I had enough understanding at that point that I knew I didn't want to die and go to hell. That was one thing. And, Zechariah 3:2 says that the Lord says to Satan, he describes Joshua, the high priest, as a brand plucked from the fire. And that's really what we all are. A lot of people kind of poo-poo what they call the fire and brimstone preaching. And I'm not saying that I heard that, but I think we do people a real disservice if we don't tell them about hell. Christ had plenty to say about hell. And I know there are some preachers that don't like to talk about it, but the fact of the matter is that that is one very good incentive to be saved, and it certainly was for me. I was at a point in life where I certainly knew that I was a sinner, and I understood that the Bible told me that I couldn't save myself. Christ died on the cross to pay for my sins. You know, the gospel is a very simple message, and that's another thing. I mean, an 8-year-old can receive it. Did I understand everything? Could I have defined it, all those theological terms in Scripture? No. But the gospel is a simple enough message, and I would just say that I put my faith and trust in God, and I've never regretted it. It's the best thing I've ever done in my life, and I think for those of us that know the Lord, hopefully we can all say that. And that's really about all I'm going to have to say about that. You know, I'm like some people perhaps. I have a pretty vague memory when it comes to a lot of my early life, but I do specifically remember that experience. I remember the Lord just speaking to me on the inside. I need to go forward. I need to do this. I want to do this. And that is one thing early in my life I have been, the Lord has blessed me that I have a clear memory about that. So just to talk a little bit about my early life. So a couple of years after that, my dad had a heart attack, and I saw that happen. And I think we would say that for many of us as children, that would be one of our greatest fears, would be our parents to die. And after that, you know, it gave me some increased responsibility, but the real lesson from that, and I think it's one of the greatest lessons that my dad ever taught me, was when he told me that he wasn't afraid to die. That meant a lot. I mean, you know, he said, look, I love my family. It's not that I want to go anywhere, but I'm not afraid to die. And I think to this day, that has really impressed very heavily on my heart. I'll skip ahead. Many of you remember, but it's been 7 years ago, but right over there lying down on the floor, I was really at the point of death. And I will say, and I just give God all the glory for this, but I just had a peace. I just really knew that God was in control, and that if it was the time for me to go, I'll say it right now, I'm ready to go. I mean, I love life, I love my family, I love my church family. But if just like this morning, about 3 o'clock this morning, it was Ned's time to go. And we all know, but we'll just say it again, we're all standing in line for that meeting with the Lord, and we just don't know our place in the line. It's not our age. I read obituaries just about every day of people younger than me, and many of you do too. And so I think it's just important that we are ready, but there's just a freedom to not live in the fear of death. I think it's something that we don't necessarily look forward to the circumstances around death, and sometimes there's suffering, but you just remember that Paul said in Philippians 1:21 that to live is Christ and to die is gain. And I think what he's really telling us there is that every day is a gift from God, and we should use it to the glory of God, and we shouldn't take it for granted. We should live for Christ. We should walk with Christ, but we also shouldn't be afraid of what's coming next, because I know that what's coming next is far, far greater. This is just a little dress rehearsal. This is just a blip on the screen of eternity, and I would hope that even though we love life, we love our family, we love our church family, that we can truly say we're looking forward to that day when we're going to be with the Lord. And so there's just a freedom to not live in that fear. A little bit about my family life. Everybody has trials and struggles in life. We don't know what other people are going through, and I think that's an important thing sometimes for us to remember. I know our brother shared his testimony recently and told us about some of the things that he went through in his early life. But we need to remember, I think, too, that we can sometimes get so focused on our own problems, and we look around and we kind of have this tendency to think that other people live charmed lives and we have all the problems. Galatians 6:4 warns us about comparing ourselves to others. And I think there's a lot of good reasons that we shouldn't do that. But the fact of the matter is that we all have our trials and tribulations and problems that we're going through, and oftentimes even some of our closest friends, we may not know what they're going through. I will just say, and I'm not going to belabor the point and all, but there are a few important lessons here. But my home life really wasn't all that happy. And I want to be very careful and honor my parents in what I'm going to say. But again, there's some important lessons to be shared. And I shared a little bit of this when I preached at my mother's funeral. But we didn't understand it at the time, but my mother did have some serious psychological issues. And they were not diagnosed nor treated until I was an adult. She was manic depressive, and that meant that she could be very contentious, very critical, very domineering, and that's very difficult for a family. Some of you perhaps been through that, and it's just a difficult thing. I would say that my father endured a lot to preserve his marriage and his family, and I certainly gained a great deal of respect and all for him for doing that. But I will say, too, that I learned some hard lessons early on about what happens when a family does not or cannot operate according to the proper biblical order and the roles in the home. Because of my mother's condition, she could be very domineering. And quite frankly, my dad often wasn't allowed to be really the leader in the home that he would have been. Because, she felt like she kind of needed to take the reins because he wasn't doing it the way that she thought was right. And I would just say that to all of us, and I'll tie in a couple other quick lessons and then I'll move on. Almost nobody outside of our home knew this. So that kind of gets back to, we don't know what other people are going through, but almost nobody really even knew that situation at all. My mother's mother knew it, and her sisters knew it. And they used to tell my mother that she just didn't appreciate what a good husband she had. And that's one thing. And frankly, she didn't until it was too late. When my father died, she outlived him by 30 years. And she grieved, I will say, a very unhealthy grief. I know there was guilt. I know there were regrets. And she truly suffered during that period of time. And so one lesson I would just say to all of us is that we just need to show the people that we love how much we really do love and appreciate them. They say sometimes don't wait until people are gone to give them their flowers. But I saw that, and I saw that, and I really saw how she suffered a lot because of that. Don't wait until it's too late. And then there's another lesson, and that is that nobody's promised an easy and happy life. Sometimes, and we say that, God doesn't promise us a bed of roses when we come to Christ, but we also live in a world where we hear of a lot of excuses. So-and-so lived a difficult life growing up, and this and that. Well, we all have difficulties, and I'm not totally dismissing the fact that we don't all suffer and have scars, because we do. But the point of the fact is there's really no excuses. I mean, you think about the Lord, He's called the man of sorrows. He was despised. He was rejected of men. And so I think we're just reminded that we should never make excuses of the fact that we've had trials and tribulations. We all know of examples of people who seemed to live a life where there was a godly home and very godly parents, and they did grow up in the church, and then they went a different way. And we also know examples of the opposite, of people who had just a terrible home life, and yet they were delivered from that, and they got through it. And so just, no excuses. When I say this, I promise you, I'm not saying it for any sympathy or anything like that. I'm just saying that all of us go through things. We need to show other people grace. We don't know what they're going through. We need to show the people that we love them and not wait until it's too late. And we need to not make excuses when we go through difficult times in our lives. And that's just really all I want to say for that. And I'm going to get to something a little more positive. And I want to say that my parents had a lot of great qualities. Their character, their reputation, their morals. My dad has been gone now for 37 years, and I still run into people in this town that tell me what a good man that he was, that they knew him. That means a lot to me. Proverbs 22:1 says that a good name is more desirable than great riches. I promise you we didn't have a whole lot of money, We lived at a time where people weren't telling us that we didn't have a lot of money as much as maybe people here today. I would say we were probably on the lower end of the middle class scale maybe, but the point is that my parents worked hard. They sacrificed for us. You think about the Proverbs 31 woman. My mother was that in that sense. She worked very hard. So did my dad. He was a Proverbs 31 dad, if you will. They both grew up during the Depression, and they both learned how to do more with less. And that kind of takes me into the lesson of being content. The Bible has a lot to say about being content. In Philippians 4:11, Paul says, I've learned to be content whether I have plenty or whether I'm in need. 1 Timothy 6:6 says that godliness with contentment is great gain. 1 Timothy 6:7 says we brought nothing into this world and we'll take nothing out. And in Hebrews 13:5 says be content with what you have. I think as we look around the room, and we're all at kind of different stages in our life, most of us are probably at stages, and we look back across our life, and we've probably gone through times where we had less and maybe other times when we had more. But we look at the world around us and we see a lot of discontentment. And just reminded, and I think that's something that my parents tried to teach me, was to be content. And people talk about the greatest generation. They came up during the Depression. My father fought during World War II. That was, I think, a generation that tended to learn a lot of that. And for those of us in the next generation, I think it's important for us to pass that on to our children, because we do tend to, I'm the first to admit, I want to spoil the people I love, at least to a degree. But I also want to teach them, hopefully, a little bit about what I was taught about being content no matter. You know, discontentment goes a long way beyond material possessions. And I was thinking about that, and just thinking about some of my life experiences that I'm trying to share. And I've seen discontentment in government politics. I've seen it in business politics. I've seen it in church politics. You see the bad effects of envy and jealousy and greed and strife, and you see how people who are insecure or discontent can do a lot of damage, whether it's government, business, the church, the family. So there's a lot to be said for being content, not just the material possessions, but the other things in life as well. And I want to insert one more little lesson there, and then I'm going to kind of go back to my life a little bit. But living with proper balance, I think that's kind of ties in with that a little bit, but that's something I think about quite a bit. When I look at the Bible, I see parables of Jesus where he'll talk about a certain thing, but then he'll go back and say, but this. In other words, live your life between the rails. Don't go off to the extreme, one way or the other. And one passage that comes to mind to me is probably one that you know pretty well, where it talks about in Ecclesiastes 3. And it talks about there being appointed seasons and times in our lives for different things. You know the passage, a time to be born, a time to die, a time to laugh, a time to weep, to speak, to be silent. There are at least 14 contrasts there. But I think sometimes we can be guilty, at least, I don't know if you go on social media or listen to what people have to say, of kind of gravitating towards one extreme or the other. One of the things that I think my parents tried to teach me that I've hopefully tried to learn is to kind of live life in proper balance a little bit, not to go off to the extreme. I've always been kind of an even-keeled type person, and I'm sure there are positive and negative effects to that, but to try not to just steer off on one side. I mentioned the Lord's parables. I mean, you think about the extremes of the Pharisees, for instance, on one side, and then you got the liberals on the other side, and we don't want to be like that. We want to be. We don't want to be an extreme one way or the other. So with that said, I'm going to kind of go back to my life and take it up a little bit during my high school years. And I was a very active youth. I think I was interested a lot in kind of getting out and doing things and doing things that did bring me a lot of satisfaction, but I was really into sports. I loved music. I was played the guitar in the band, in the choir. I was in Scouts. I was an Eagle Scout. I had jobs But I was in multiple church groups, and that really is the main thing. I've always been tied in with the church. Most of the best parts of my social life, my relationships have always been tied to the church. And I guess I just can't stress enough the importance of that. The Bible certainly tells us in Hebrews 10:25 that we're not to forsake assembling in the church, but I just want to say that I really can't imagine where my life would be without the church. Throughout my life, like I said, my social life, my relationships, mainly through the church, certainly until this day. But I was involved in more than one church group. My home church, I ended up serving as the president of the youth fellowship, and I preached my first sermon when I was about 17 years old. So, listen, I'm still working on it. Listen, I'm going to be 64 next month, so let's see, doing the math. I've been practicing for 47 years. I'm trying to learn to do it. But I knew at the time that I wanted to be some kind of doctor. I'd gotten to that point in my life. That's kind of the career path I was planning to do. But as a Christian, you hear a lot about, quote, full-time Christian work. How does that all play in together? So the passage that I preached on was Colossians 3:17. Whatever you do, do it to the glory of God. And that just really had an impact. It was a lesson that really encouraged me. It encouraged me to go forward with the plans that I felt like that God had for me. Quite frankly, it was quite a wonderful thing once I came to the New Testament assemblies and realized that I could have a vocational life and still be a preacher or a shepherd or other things. And I think that's what the Bible teaches us, right? I mean, Paul was a tent maker, right? Apostle was not his vocation. But at that point in my life, I'm thinking, okay, is this really what the Lord wants me to do? But I think that particular passage of Scripture, there again, it's pretty simple. And I'm a pretty simple-minded guy. But when it says, whatever you do, do it to the glory of God, whatever you do is whatever you do, right? And I think that's what we should think about, is the things that we don't necessarily think sometimes are Christian service. If we're doing it for Him and we're doing it for His people in His name, it is an important work. That's something that Steve Price was preaching about recently down in Burlington, getting across. Sometimes people call this, spiritual work versus secular work, or this work or that work. But let's put it all in perspective and say that God wants for us to do it for His glory. With God, there's not the sacred and the secular, right? I mean, He created it all. Everything is His. And so I think that's something that, as I grew older and matured some spiritually, that I had a better understanding of. College and dental school. I spent 8 years at college and dental school in Chapel Hill. I'll just say it changed my life in many ways. It was certainly a different world academically. I had been a good student in high school, pretty much graduated at the top of my class, got to college and realized I didn't even really know how to study. And then dental school was a whole nother animal. I mean, that was the next level up. But I did learn a lot there that I was going to have to study and work hard, and I learned better how to try to manage and budget my time. That was important to me because I had a goal. And I'll just back up and say I think it's good to have ambition as far as having goals and set those goals. What do they say? To fail to plan is to plan to fail. But we also need to make sure that we leave plenty of room for the Lord to change those. And I'm going to get to that here before 8 o'clock too. But just to say that was a goal that I wanted to do. I knew the numbers. There were generally about 2,000 applicants to dental school every year, and they took 70. And I wasn't the sharpest knife in the room, so I knew I was going to have to work pretty hard. And so I learned to budget my time a little better. And I'll just say that you go to a school, whether it's Carolina or NC State or any large school, you find what you're looking for. I think anybody that's ever gone to college would say that. I was blessed. I feel like by the grace of God, He just led me to Christian friends. I got there the first time on campus. My RA was a believer. The Lord just put other believers in my path. I look back in my life and just see how the Lord has given me so many times where He's just put believers and mentors and people to encourage me in my path. So, but it's just important to think about, we find what we're looking for. I became an FCA leader. I was involved in some of the other organizations there. I'm going to tell you a quick story about an experience I had. I think about this when I read the passage in 1 Corinthians 3 about God's fellow workers in the gospel, and one plants and one waters, but we know that God makes all things to grow, and God is the one who adds to the church, as we read about in Acts chapter 2. So my sophomore year, I was assigned a roommate, and he was not a Christian. I wasn't too thrilled about it. He was an incoming freshman that acted like he'd never been away from home before, liked to stay out half the night, party. He wasn't a bad guy, but he wasn't a Christian, and wasn't somebody that I would have chosen to have as a roommate. But I will say that because we had some believers in our circle there, and I was his roommate, we witnessed to him and really didn't see any fruit for a couple of years. But he did end up committing his life to Christ. And I will say, I don't know where he is now. I hope that everything was real. But for the rest of the college career, it seemed like that he was on the right path. And so just to encourage us that a lot of times we witness to people, we do this and do that, we don't really see fruit. And I'm sure there were people that never even saw the fruit in his life. And I did see that he came to know the Lord. But that's just an example of something that I wouldn't have chosen, somebody that I wouldn't have chosen to room with, but the Lord knew what He was doing and put him in a situation where he was introduced to a lot of believers. And so another lesson learned. I'm going to try to move along here, but one thing that happened to me in dental school about halfway through was I had a really bad car accident in 1986. I was coming home from school late one night. I was actually going to the mountains early Saturday morning with the college and career youth group from the church. And I learned an important lesson that night, is that it's hard to drive safely with your eyes closed. And it just happened for a few minutes. I don't know if you've ever had this experience happen before, but I mean, just for a few minutes, I just kind of, not minutes, seconds, excuse me. And then, minutes. I'm going down 40, few minutes, But just like that, I mean, I was off the road, pitch dark, no house around, no lights. I went through a stop sign, literally, and I missed a telephone pole, I found out later, by less than a foot. And just to say that 6 months earlier, I had a first cousin who was about my age that was killed in a similar fashion with a telephone pole. And so that kind of got my attention. And it really taught me something about the sovereignty of God. I mean, why me, right? Why was my life spared and not the other one? But I just learned a lot there. But there again, you learn how quickly your life can end. Okay, I was young. Seemed like your life hadn't gotten started yet, but it could have ended real quickly. So, came back home to Rockingham County. I want to mention Dr. Jeff here for a minute and just talk a little bit about his influence in my life, because I wanted to stay in North Carolina. I wanted to stay in a pretty small town. Unlike a lot of my classmates that wanted to go to a big city, I really like the small town life. I really didn't know that I had an opportunity to come back here. Now, some of you have heard me say that I knew Jan's family growing up. Okay, by the time she went off to school, I was still a little boy, kind of. She knew who I was. Our families knew each other, but I didn't really know Jeff except for the fact that he had married Jan. And so when I came out of dental school, Jeff is 10 years older than me. He had been in practice here for that period of time, and he didn't need me at all. I mean, he did not need anybody to come in and work with him. He didn't need he just didn't need a partner or anything like that. But by the grace of God, for some reason, and I will tell you, because he told me, because he's a Christian and he knew that I was a Christian, he offered me the opportunity to come in and work with him for my first year out. And Jeff's not here, but he was an outstanding dentist, and I learned a lot working with him. And it was like another year of training in a sense of how to run and operate a private practice of dentistry. But just to say that he gave me the opportunity to come back here, which turned out to be a really good thing in my life. My dad died the next year. It was great that I was here, that I lived here. Ended up indirectly, and I don't have time, it's a great story, but ended up kind of meeting Susan through being my dental practice here and associations there. But, at the time that I actually worked with him, the Reidsville Bible Chapel was fixing to be born. That's when I first met Steve and Kim, and their oldest kids were babies kind of, and met Jerry and Karen. I went to their Bible study some. They had started actually having the Bible study in his office. And so the influence was far beyond dentistry. I mean, I learned some good things from him, practicing with him in dentistry, but really later on it led to kind of us coming here because I really knew a lot about the chapel through my relationship with him, and then later with Steve and Kim, we became neighbors and others. But who would have ever thought? And I guess what I'm saying is that he would not have had me come back here had we not both been Christians. And he really didn't even know me all that well personally. Jan did, but somehow by the grace of God, he offered me that opportunity, and so, here we are. Then I get to kind of what was the most difficult period in my life. When I was 30 years old, I started having really severe health issues, back issues, neurological issues. For about 2 years, I was often missing work for weeks at a time. And keep in mind, I was the sole owner of a private practice of dentistry. So if I'm not there working, there's nothing being generated. Okay. And it was very frustrating. I mean, we went to specialists for 2 years. I was getting all kinds of possible diagnoses, but nothing clear, no cure. Make a long story short, after a lot of just prayer and people from a church coming and praying with me, I woke up in the middle of the night one night, sneezed immediately, and I had a disc in my back that just exploded. And that was a blessing. Because even as painful as it was, and it was the most painful, worst week of my life, but at least we had a clear diagnosis and a cure. I'll just say this. I had an emergency surgery. I was diagnosed with a degenerative disc disease and some neurological issues. I was 33 years old at the time. The doctor said I had the back of a 70-year-old. And he said that I was going to have to retire from full-time private practice of dentistry before long, or I was going to be in a wheelchair. So that got my attention. And so, I've pretty much been working toward this point in my life now for about 15 years. All right, I've got a wife. I've got a 1-year-old son. I'm just now starting to get my debt down and starting to make a little bit of money. And now, it was going to be gone. But I want to say that the Lord, even there, was gracious. He allowed me to stay in the practice for 4 more years. I would literally go to work in the morning. I would work 3 hours. I would go home for 3 hours in the middle of the day and lie down, and I'd go back and work for 3 more. But by doing that, I was able to maintain my practice a little bit longer. I was able to sell it for fair market value rather than just losing it and giving it away. So God was very gracious for me. But I'll just say the Lord was just teaching me that utter dependence on Him. I think we all get to a point in our life where we realize that really I'm not in control, but God is. I was really at a point in my life where probably most people would have said I was a rather successful young doctor. I had a beautiful wife and a son, and life is good and all that. And all of a sudden, things are gone. It seems like. But I'll just say that God really used that opportunity for me to strengthen my faith, to really believe by faith that He had a plan and a purpose, although I had no idea what it was. And I will tell you, at the time, it was the worst, most difficult time in my life. But I can look back now and see how God brought so many opportunities. There are a lot of things that I otherwise would not have been able to do as a full-time dentist, more things than I have time to explain. I might go a little over 8. But things that taught me a lot, and things particularly that helped me grow spiritually, and just to remind me that my identity is in Christ and not in my profession. I think for a lot of people, and maybe for men in particular, you meet somebody, well, what do you do? Right? What is my identity? Well, my identity is not being a dentist. My identity is being a child of God and hopefully a good husband and father and church member and that type thing. But it's all about the Lord. That's where our identity used to be. And I will say that, it really did deal me a blow, but it wasn't a devastating blow because of the Lord. I've had some other friends that are professionals that kind of had to lose a lot, and I will tell you it was just totally devastating for them. And I will tell you, if it hadn't have been for the Lord, it would have been totally devastating for me. I don't know how people operate without the Lord. I don't know how people deal with death. I don't know how people deal with a lot of things. But I'll tell you, I probably wouldn't have been able to deal with that. But 2 Corinthians 12:9 says that God's grace is sufficient to strengthen us when we endure trials. And I got to know that verse pretty well. I was reminded that God really is in control, and my life really is in His hands. I really believe that we don't realize how much He protects us. We think about the guardian angels and how we're protected for this or that, but the older I get in life, the more I know about God's sovereignty. We're going to be here as long as He wants for us to be. But I know that He's taken care of me, and when His time comes, it'll be His sovereign time. Proverbs 19:21 says, "Many are the plans in a man's heart, but the Lord's purpose prevails." I think it's said here sometimes that where the Lord is not allowed to rule, He overrules. And I think we see that in our lives as well. And then finally, we all know Romans 8:28, and we know that all things that God works for the good of those who love Him, who are the called according to His purpose. It doesn't say that all things are good, but He does say that He will work them for our good. And I know that some of the things that I went through at the time weren't really good, but I can see how God used them for my good. I want to talk just for a minute about church life. I've basically spent my entire life in 3 churches. The one I grew up in, the one I joined as a young man when I came back, and then we've been here now for the last 22 years. A lot of things learned along the way, much more than I have time to say. I do appreciate the time that I had at my previous church. People there were very gracious to me, put me in a position where I was able to develop leadership. I was able to do some preaching, Sunday school teaching. We had a ministry with senior citizens back before I was one. But I just want to say in all sincerity what a blessing it is and has been for me and for my family to be a part of this assembly. I know we say it sometimes, but we just should never take things for granted. And we know we have our flaws like anybody else. But it has been such a blessing. I've just seen the slow but steady growth in my life, and I think in my family's life for the Lord, for His Word, the desire to shepherd, encourage God's people. And I just want to say what an encouragement the people here have been to me. I've learned so much from people here, really from the beginning, and I just can't underestimate the impact that being a part here, just serving as an elder, serving as a deacon before that, and even before that too. It's just been a great blessing, and I hope that we all kind of have a little bit of realization of what we have here. It's a great blessing. Just a few other things. Y'all know I've served in politics. I have learned a lot through politics. I've learned a lot about people. I tell people that, you usually hear the bad, but I've met some of the finest people that I know, people that are very dedicated to the Lord, and then I've seen the other side of it too. It's helped me with my self-discipline, with my time management. When I was first elected, there was a wise senator that told me not to neglect my time with the Lord. And I've come to understand the fact that God uses busy people. The reason you're a busy person is because you're willing to let God use you. It's really easy for us sometimes to make excuses. We can say, well, I'm too young, or I'm too old, or I'm too busy, or I'm just getting started in life and I got to do this and that, or I'm retired now and I'm going to let other people do it. We can always make excuses. But the Lord, I think, does have a real purpose in His church. And I love the way, after a lifetime in churches, and I'm not disparaging anywhere, but to see a church that tries to operate in a way where people do come together and give their spiritual gifts. I remember when the elders first met with us, when we wanted to come into fellowship here, I won't forget that visual picture of that fellowship, the fellows in the ship, rowing the ship together, and I thought, that's it. I mean, that's really the way it ought to be. You don't see anybody here that's paid to do something, and nobody here that serves does it for that reason. And it's just such a blessing, to see the young people that do what they do here, the older people, and everybody in between. And so I just can't say really enough about that. I do want to mention the Capital Commission service. That's really opened a lot of doors. I truly think, and I apologize for going over a little bit, but when you're as old as me, it takes a while. But I really believe I was elected to the legislature so that I can do what I do now. And I believe that the way that I was elected to the legislature was God's plan and that it was miraculous. Because if it had not been, I would have done the dumbest thing that anybody ever did in politics. And when the first time that I ran as an unaffiliated candidate. That's never been done, and it wasn't because of me, but I'm determined that the Lord had me do that so that He could show me that it was Him. Because I will tell you that even some of my best friends in Raleigh and the people that were behind me thought there was no chance. And I said, well, I don't know if the Lord called me to win or not, but I think He called me to run. But I will say about this in my political life, I'm glad I'm able to do what I'm able to do now. There were so many times when I was in the legislature that I was in the middle of a debate or something on the floor, and I wanted to say something so bad. And I will say the Lord held my tongue, and I'm glad He did, because if He hadn't, I wouldn't be able to do what I do now. To be in a chaplaincy role, to be able to work with people on both sides of the aisle. They know pretty much where I stand politically, but if I had burned some bridges early on, it just wouldn't have happened. So I tell people I never regretted something that I didn't say. But there were plenty of times when I wanted to say something, and He held my tongue, and I think there's something to be said for that. So I guess the last little section is to finish well. I think a lot of us, some of you are at the point in life where I am, some of you are a little older than me. The average American male lives to be in their 70s. I'm getting there quickly. But as I said, I read people's obituaries every day that are younger than I am. I'm reminded often, and I think about this, I really feel like people would say I'm living on borrowed time. I did have a nurse tell me when I went to the hospital emergency room that day, that was a widowmaker heart attack with 100% blockage. The chances of surviving that are practically zero. She said she had been a nurse for 25 years and she had never met anybody that survived that heart attack. And I said, well, I think the Lord still has something left for me to do. And I actually had some people in the operating room to tell me that too. But in 2 Kings chapter 20, many of us remember the story about King Hezekiah. And he prayed to the Lord, and the Lord gave him 15 more years. And unfortunately, it wasn't his best time of life. He didn't finish as well. He made a big mistake there, and he paid a price, and the nation paid a price. He didn't finish so well. And I've heard others here say, and I feel the same way, I just want to finish well. Whatever it is that the Lord has for me to do. As I said, I love life. I'm ready to go home when the Lord calls me. Some of you knew my friend Jerry Carter, who served at the Reidsville Baptist Church here, and he succeeded me in the legislature, and I had the privilege of being able to preach his funeral. But one of the things I got to say was something he told me. He said, I'll say in my sermons sometime, he said, if somebody tells you that the preacher's dead, don't you believe them. He said, I'll be more alive than I've ever been before. And I hope we feel that way. I certainly do. Matthew 6 tells us not to worry about tomorrow. right? Who can add a day to their life by worrying? 1 Peter 5:7 says, "Cast your cares upon the Lord because He cares for you." Psalm 55:22, "If you cast your burdens upon the Lord, He will sustain you." Let's try not to worry about the things, but let's try to let the Lord guide us. And you know the serenity prayer, God give me the courage to change the things I can, the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, and the wisdom to know the difference. Some wise person told me sometime back in my life, there are two kinds of things you shouldn't worry about. Don't worry about the things you can't change, because you can't change them. And don't worry about the things you can change. If you need to change, just change them. You don't need to worry about them. So I try to do that. I'm still learning. The Lord's still working on me like He is on all of us. I don't care how old we are. But I do want to just say I can look back and see through the years again how the Lord has brought so many people into my life. People in this room, people I grew up with, people I went to school with, that have really helped me on so many ways in my spiritual walk. And I want to be somebody that He can use to help other people too. So I've learned this, and now I'm going to stop. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And the more I know, the more I realize that I don't know. But God bless you. I appreciate the opportunity to share and just for us to live life together here. And God bless Reidsville Bible Chapel. So thank you.
Sister Beth and their extended family. Also, continue to pray for Randy with his recovery from the oblation that he had. Continue to pray for Dr. Jeff with the stent, or not the stent, but the catheterization that he went through, and with this cyst that's on his liver or kidney. Renal is kidney, right? Yeah, okay. Be praying about the resolution of that. Other requests that you have. Tim?
Sister Trula had a Mohs surgery today. It was melanoma just below the ear on one side. They got it all, she said. If you could just be remembering her, ask for her to recuperate well, please.
Okay, pray for Tim's sister Trula with a Mohs surgery procedure. Tanya?
Don't forget Ray Carroll and then Diane's mom, Mary Ann, with congestive heart failure. They're trying to figure out what's causing that. They're in the process of doing it.
Okay, Ray Carroll in the last stages of life, and Diane Carroll's mother with congestive heart failure.
Craig's having some health issues. Appreciate your prayers as tests being run.
Okay, pray for Craig French with some health issues. Jerry?
I've got a kidney procedures tomorrow morning. I got to be there in Salisbury at 8:30.
Okay, pray for Jerry with a kidney procedure tomorrow morning.
Steve. Ruthie is with her sisters. They're having a sisters getaway at the lake. Jennifer's in from Africa, and Lynette's in from Colorado, so pray for them to have a good time and get them safe. Update on Mountaintop. There is optimism, but it's a very, very tight timeline. It's counting on everybody to follow through with expedited this and expedited that, and then I want to be called this when I grow up, but the hood master has to get done with the hood in time so that it can be installed, and then I'm sure all that has to be inspected, and the Jones crew has done everything they can to expedite it and get it ready. So a hiccup and it might be set back.
Yeah. Okay. So
right
pray.
now there is a window.
pray from Mountaintop that this kitchen project would be able to be completed so it wouldn't interrupt any more weeks of camp. Any other request? Okay.
Anybody can call me Hoodmaster if you want to.
If the men will go across the way, the ladies can stay in here.